The refugee camp on Kepler 442b sprawled across the valley like a wound that refused to heal. Daniela had been there for 3 cycles now, ever since the Zarthik had glassed her homeworld. She was 7 years old, though the hollow look in her eyes belonged to someone who had lived a dozen lifetimes. Devon occupied the tent at the edge of the camp, where the artificial lights barely reached. The other refugees whispered about him. The human soldier who had fought in the Outer Rim campaigns, the one who screamed in his sleep, the one whose hands shook when the supply shuttles roared overhead. He was 42 standard years, but the war had carved decades into his face. The camp counselors had tried everything with Daniela: sedatives, therapy programs, even a Centaurian dreamweaver, whose psychic abilities were supposed to soothe traumatized minds. Nothing worked. Every night she woke screaming about the monsters, the biomechanical horrors the Zarthik deployed to terrorize civilian populations before the orbital bombardment began. On the 73rd night, Daniela made a decision. She slipped from her assigned shelter pod after lights out, her bare feet silent on the cold polymer flooring. The camp's security was lax. Most guards were volunteers from species who had never known conflict, who couldn't imagine a child might wander into danger. They were wrong about many things when it came to humans. Devon's tent was military issue, scavenged from some long-forgotten battlefield. It stood apart from the prefabricated structures, a relic of a more brutal time. Daniela approached it the way she might approach a wounded animal, cautiously, respectfully, recognizing something kindred in its isolation. "Hello?" Her voice was barely a whisper. The tent flap opened. Devon stood there, eyes red-rimmed and wild, sweat gleaming on his scarred forearms. He had been in the middle of it again, the nightmare that never ended, the one where he watched his entire platoon die on Arcturus 7 while he survived, protected by nothing but cosmic indifference and cruel chance. "Kid, you shouldn't be here," he said, his voice gravel rough. "Go back to your pod." Daniela didn't move. She looked up at him with those ancient eyes and asked the question that would change both their lives. "Can you scare my monsters away?" Devon sat up as if fighting one inside him. His whole body went rigid, muscles tensing like coiled springs. For a moment, Daniela thought she had made a terrible mistake. Then his shoulders sagged and something in his expression shifted. Pain recognizing pain, trauma acknowledging trauma. "I can't even scare away my own, kid." "But you're a soldier," Daniela said, stepping closer. "You fought them, the real monsters, the Zarthik. That's exactly why I can't help you." Devon turned away, running a hand through his cropped hair. "I've got too many monsters of my own." Daniela stood there for a long moment. Then she did something unexpected. She sat down on the ground outside his tent, cross-legged and stubborn. "Then maybe we can be scared together. My counselor says it's better than being scared alone." Devon stared at her. In that moment, he saw something he hadn't seen in months: purpose. Not the grand, galaxy-saving purpose that recruitment posters promised, but something smaller and infinitely more important. A scared child who had chosen him of all people to trust. He sat down across from her. "All right," he said quietly. "Tell me about your monsters." And she did. Daniela spoke of the chittering sounds in the night, of metal claws scraping against bunker doors, of the smell of ozone and burning flesh. She described the Zarthik hunter drones with a precision that made Devon's chest ache. She had seen them, really seen them, in ways that would mark her forever. When she finished, Devon was silent for a long time. "You know what the Zarthik don't understand about humans?" he finally said. "They think fear makes us weak. They're wrong. Fear makes us remember, and remembering makes us careful, makes us prepared." "I don't want to remember," Daniela whispered. "I know. But you will anyway, so we might as well make it useful." Devon leaned forward, his voice taking on the tone he had once used to brief new recruits. The hunter drones, they had a weakness. Their thermal sensors couldn't penetrate standard insulation. That's why we survived in the bunkers, right? The monsters couldn't actually see you. They were just guessing. Daniela's eyes widened slightly. They were guessing? Terrifying guesses, but yeah. They were scary, but they weren't all-knowing. They could be fooled. They could be beaten. Devon felt something unfamiliar stirring in his chest. Hope, perhaps, or something like it. Every monster has a weakness, even the ones in our heads. Over the following weeks, a routine developed. Each night, Daniela would appear at Devon's tent. Each night, they would sit together and talk about monsters, the real ones and the remembered ones. Devon taught her breathing exercises he had learned from a combat psychologist. She taught him a game her mother had played with her before the fire fell from the sky. The camp counselors noticed the change. Daniela was sleeping through the night more often. Devon's hands shook less. The Zentari medical officer called it symbiotic healing, which was their species' way of being surprised that something so simple could work. But humans understood. Humans had always understood that sometimes the only way to fight your demons was to stand beside someone else fighting theirs. On the 120th night, Daniela arrived at Devon's tent with something clutched in her small hand, a drawing she had made during therapy. It showed two figures sitting together beneath an impossible sky, surrounded by shadows that didn't quite touch them. "We're not scared away the monsters," she said, handing it to him. "But they don't feel so big anymore." Devon took the drawing with trembling fingers. He looked at this small human who had faced horrors that would break species with millennia of civilization, who had chosen courage in the form of simply asking for help. "No," he agreed, his voice rough with emotion. "They don't feel so big anymore." Across the galaxy, the Zarthic Collective would eventually learn what other species already knew, that humanity's greatest weapon wasn't their technology or their tactical brilliance. It was their stubborn refusal to let darkness win. It was their ability to find light in each other, even in the deepest night. It was a veteran and a child, sitting together at the edge of a refugee camp, proving that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is admit you're scared and reach for someone else's hand in the darkness. The monsters would always be there, but so would they. And that made all the difference.